The farm girl arrived to take care of the Millionaire's horses and froze when she saw her childhood photo in the barn. The morning dew clung to the tall grass as Lauren Matthews made her way through the field, her worn boots leaving a trail in the amber sea of wheat. At 27, she moved with the confident stride of someone who'd spent their life working the land. The rising Tennessee sun cast long shadows across the small farmhouse in the distance, the only home she'd ever known. "Graham, I'm heading out to check the fence line," she called, pushing a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear. Miss Mabel appeared at the door, wiping her hands on a faded apron, though not her biological grandmother. At least that's what she'd always been told. The elderly woman had raised Lauren since infancy with calloused hands and a tender heart. "Take some biscuits with you," Mabel insisted, her voice weathered by time. "And be back before noon. Pastor Williams might stop by." Lauren suppressed a groan. Another attempt at matchmaking, no doubt. "I'll try," she promised, knowing full well she'd find reasons to stay in the fields until the pastor had come and gone. The morning passed in a comfortable rhythm of physical work, mending fences, checking irrigation lines, tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. These moments alone with the land were when Lauren felt most at peace, connected to something larger than herself. The farm wasn't much, 40 acres of mostly wheat and a modest vegetable garden, but it was enough to keep her and Miss Mabel afloat, especially with the extra income from Lauren's weekend job at the local market. By midday, she found herself at the ancient oak that marked the boundary of their property. Settling in its shade, she unwrapped the biscuits and pulled out the small metal canteen of sweet tea. As she ate, her fingers instinctively reached for the silver pendant that hung around her neck, an oval locket with intricate engravings she'd traced 1,000 times. Inside, nothing but emptiness. No photo, no inscription, no clue to its origin. It was the only thing she had from before. Before Miss Mabel, before this farm, before her life began. "Who were you?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the ghosts of her unknown past. The familiar ache of wondering tugged at her chest, a hollow feeling she'd learned to live with, but had never quite filled. Miss Mabel rarely spoke of how Lauren had come into her care. When pressed, the story remained maddeningly vague. A distant relative's child, parents deceased in an accident, no other family to speak of. The details shifted subtly with each telling, and Lauren had long suspected there was more than her grandmother was sharing. The pendant was the one constant, the one tangible connection to that blank space where her origins should be. "You were wearing it when you came to me," Miss Mabel had said. "Never could get you to part with it, even as a baby." A rustling in the nearby bushes startled her from her thoughts. A moment later, Timothy, the mail carrier's 12-year-old son, emerged on his bicycle. "Miss Lauren," he called, skidding to a stop and nearly toppling over in his enthusiasm. "Got something for you." She rose, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "Since when are you delivering mail, Timothy?" "Dad's got lumbago again," the boy explained, digging into his messenger bag. "I'm helping out, but this one's special. Came by private courier to the post office. Dad said I should bring it straight to you." Lauren frowned, taking the cream-colored envelope with its heavy stock and elegant penmanship. People in Willow Creek didn't receive mail by private courier. They just didn't. "Thanks, Timothy," she said, fishing a quarter from her pocket and flipping it to him. The boy caught it with a grin and was soon pedaling away, leaving Lauren alone with the mysterious envelope. Her name was written in flowing script across the front with no return address. The paper felt expensive between her fingers, completely out of place in her soil-stained hands. Breaking the seal, she unfolded a single page and began to read. "Mrs. Matthews, I hope this letter finds you well. My name is Richard Coleman, estate manager for Bennett Hills Ranch, following a recommendation from an old acquaintance of Miss Mabel Winters. I am writing to offer you a position as an assistant horse trainer at our facility. Bennett Hills is one of the foremost thoroughbred operations in the state, and we are selectively expanding our staff. The position includes accommodations on the property, meals, and a competitive salary that I believe you would find more than satisfactory. Should you be interested, please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss details. Our owner, Mr. Edward Harper, has personally approved this offer, based on the high recommendation we received regarding your work ethic and experience with horses. Respectfully, Richard Coleman, Estate Manager, Bennett Hills Ranch, A phone number was listed at the bottom. Lauren read the letter twice more, certain there must be some mistake. She'd grown up around horses, yes. Miss Mabel had kept 2 old mares until a few years ago, but she was hardly qualified as a trainer, especially not for a place like Bennett Hills. The Harper estate was practically legendary in these parts. Thousands of acres of the most prime land in the county, championship horses, old money, and who was this old acquaintance of Miss Mabel's? Her grandmother kept to herself, her social circle limited to church and the occasional quilting circle. Lauren folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. Miss Mabel would have answers. She always did, even if they were carefully curated ones. As she walked back toward the farmhouse, the weight of the letter seemed to grow heavier with each step. Something about it felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate, like the envelope contained not just an unexpected job offer, but a doorway to something else, something that had been waiting for her. The pendant felt warm against her skin as she quickened her pace, the familiar landscape of the only home she'd ever known, suddenly looking different, temporary, somehow, as if she were seeing it through the eyes of someone who was already preparing to leave. "Don't be ridiculous," she muttered to herself, pushing away the strange feeling. "It's just a job offer." But as the old farmhouse came into view, with Miss Mabel's silhouette visible through the kitchen window, Lauren couldn't shake the sense that everything was about to change. The gravel driveway seemed to stretch for miles, winding through manicured fields where thoroughbreds grazed behind pristine white fences. Lauren gripped the steering wheel of her ancient pickup truck, feeling increasingly out of place with each passing moment. Bennett Hills Ranch wasn't just wealthy. It was old money, the kind that had shaped the county for generations. She'd spent the past week in a whirlwind. Miss Mabel's reaction to the job offer had been oddly mixed, surprise giving way to a troubled expression, before she'd composed herself and offered cautious encouragement. "It's a fine opportunity," she'd said finally. "The Harpers are respected folk. The pay would set you up nicely." But something in the old woman's eyes hadn't matched her words. When Lauren pressed about this mysterious acquaintance who'd recommended her, Miss Mabel had busied herself with the dishes, mumbling something about church connections from years back, before changing the subject. Despite her misgivings, Lauren had called the number. Richard Coleman had been efficient and formal, outlining a salary that made her eyes widen and confirming that she could start the following Monday. Now, as Bennett Hills Manor came into view, Lauren felt her breath catch. The colonial-style mansion sat regally atop a gentle rise, its white columns and brick facade speaking of heritage and privilege. Staff quarters, stables, and training facilities sprawled across the surrounding acres in perfect harmony. Lauren parked her truck between sleek SUVs and luxury sedans, wincing at the contrast, gathering her single duffel bag. She made her way toward the main house, rehearsing her introduction in her head. "Ms. Matthews?" She turned to find a trim man in his 50s approaching, his pressed khakis and button-down shirt making her jeans and flannel feel even more out of place. "Mr. Coleman." Indeed. His handshake was firm but brief. "Welcome to Bennett Hills. I trust your drive was pleasant." Lauren nodded, following as he led her not toward the mansion, but along a stone path toward a smaller, though still impressive, 2-story building. "These are the senior staff quarters," he explained. "You'll have the east suite on the 2nd floor. Meals are served in the main house kitchen for staff at 6, noon, and 7, though you're welcome to keep your own food in your quarters as well." The accommodation was nicer than anything Lauren had ever lived in. A bedroom with adjoining sitting area, private bath, and a small kitchenette, all tastefully furnished. "It's beautiful," she managed, setting down her bag. "Thank you. Mr. Harper prefers his staff to be comfortable," Coleman replied. "He believes it translates to better care for the horses. Speaking of which, you'll begin tomorrow morning, 6 sharp at the training paddock. Tonight, Mr. Harper has requested you join him for dinner in the main house. 7:30. Lauren's surprise must have shown on her face. "Is that unusual?" she asked. Coleman's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Harper takes a personal interest in all senior staff appointments. You'll find he's quite involved in all aspects of Bennett Hills." After Coleman departed, Lauren unpacked her meager belongings, feeling like an imposter with every item she placed in the elegant dresser. She'd brought her one good outfit, dark jeans and a forest green blouse. for this dinner with her mysterious new employer. The hours crawled by as she explored the grounds, familiarizing herself with the layout of the stables and training areas. The facilities were state-of-the-art, and the horses, magnificent creatures with gleaming coats and proud bearings, watched her with intelligent eyes as she passed. Near one of the distant paddocks, she encountered an elderly man brushing down a chestnut mare. His weathered face spoke of decades in the sun, and his hands moved with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a lifetime caring for horses. "You must be the new girl," he said without looking up, his voice gravelly but not unfriendly. "Lauren Matthews," she confirmed, extending her hand. He finished his stroke before taking it. "Augustus Miller." "Everyone calls me Gus. Been here longer than most of these buildings." "It's a beautiful place," Lauren offered. "Beautiful things can cast long shadows," he replied cryptically, returning to his work. "You settling in all right?" "I think so. Although I'm still not sure why I'm here. I mean, I've worked with horses my whole life. But nothing like." She gestured at the Olympic-grade facilities surrounding them. Gus paused, his eyes suddenly sharp as they met hers. "Not sure myself. Mr. Harper usually brings in trainers from Kentucky or overseas. Never hired local before." He studied her face a moment longer. "You remind me of someone," before Lauren could ask who. A bell sounded in the distance. "That's the first dinner call," Gus said, returning to his work. "Best get yourself ready if you're dining at the big house tonight." At precisely 7:25, Lauren presented herself at the main house, where a housekeeper led her to a formal dining room that could have seated 20, but was set for only 2. Crystal glinted under soft chandelier light, and fresh flowers perfumed the air. She had barely taken in the surroundings when a door opened at the far end of the room. Edward Harper was not what she had expected. In his early 50s, he carried himself with a quiet authority that commanded attention without demanding it. Salt and pepper hair framed a face that might have been handsome, if not for the permanent furrow between his brows and the somber set of his mouth. His eyes, though, they were arresting, deep blue and penetrating. They seemed to look through rather than at her. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his voice cultured and controlled. "Welcome to Bennett Hills. Thank you for having me, Mr. Harper. Edward, please." He gestured to the chair opposite his own. "I prefer to dispense with formalities among my senior staff, as they were served a meal that would have cost a week's worth of groceries back home." Edward Harper asked pointed questions about her experience with horses, her methodologies, her observations of Bennett Hills so far. Lauren answered honestly, increasingly unsure why someone of his caliber would be interested in her modest expertise. "And your family?" he asked as dessert was served. "Miss Mabel raised you, I understand." Lauren nodded, surprised by the personal turn. "Yes. Since I was an infant, my parents died in an accident." Something flickered in Edward's eyes, a shadow so brief she might have imagined it. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his tone suddenly formal. "Miss Mabel has no other family." "No, it's just been the 2 of us." Edward fell silent, studying his dessert with undue interest. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge Lauren couldn't place. "I knew someone from Willow Creek once, a long time ago." The statement hung in the air, seemingly without purpose. Before Lauren could respond, he abruptly changed the subject, discussing the training schedule for the coming weeks. As dinner concluded, Edward rose to see her out personally. At the doorway, he paused, those penetrating eyes searching her face again. "I hope you'll be comfortable here, Lauren." Something in the way he said her name, a strange mixture of distance and intimacy, sent a shiver up her spine. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm looking forward to the work." Walking back to her quarters under a star-filled sky, Lauren couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this job offer than a simple recommendation. The way Edward had looked at her, almost as if searching for something, or someone, as she approached the staff building. She glimpsed a light in one of the distant barns, not the main stables, but an older structure set apart from the others. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway briefly before disappearing inside. Lauren pulled her jacket tighter around herself, suddenly aware of the vastness of Bennett Hills and the smallness of her place within it. Whatever secrets this place held, whatever reason she had been brought here, she sensed they were only beginning to unfold. Lauren's first week at Bennett Hills unfolded in a rhythm of early mornings and long days. She settled into a routine working with the yearlings in the training paddock. Beautiful. Spirited creatures with bloodlines worth more than she'd make in a decade. Despite her initial uncertainty, she found her instincts with the horses were sound. The animals responded to her naturally, and even the head trainer, a taciturn man named Davis, had begrudgingly acknowledged her decent hand, with a particularly difficult filly. Edward Harper remained a distant figure. After that first dinner, their interactions had been limited to brief encounters. A nod across the grounds, a short exchange about a promising colt, yet Lauren often felt his eyes on her when she worked in the training ring, watching from the shadow of his office window or from behind the stable doors. It was Gus who became her unexpected ally. The old stable hand seemed to materialize whenever she had a question, offering quiet guidance or a bit of the ranch's history. He'd been at Bennett Hills for nearly 40 years, he told her, since Edward's father ran the operation. The place has changed, he'd said one afternoon as they groomed a pair of mares. Used to be more life here, more family. Family? Lauren had asked. I thought Mr. Harper was unmarried. Gus had given her that same searching look he'd worn when they first met. He is now, was all he'd said before changing the subject. By her 7th day, Lauren had mapped most of the sprawling property in her mind, except for one place. The old barn she'd glimpsed that first night stood apart from the immaculate facilities, its weathered wood and sagging roof an anomaly on the perfectly maintained estate. No one used it, no one mentioned it, yet twice more she'd seen lights there after dark, and once she was certain she'd spotted Edward himself emerging from its doors at dawn. On a bright Wednesday morning, with the training schedule lighter than usual, Lauren found herself with a rare few hours to herself. She'd intended to write to Miss Mabel, who'd called twice already asking detailed questions about Bennett Hills that Lauren couldn't quite understand the purpose of. But as she sat on the small porch outside her quarters, the distant barn caught her eye once more. Before she could reconsider, Lauren was walking across the east pasture toward the structure. Up close, it was even more incongruous with the rest of Bennett Hills. While not exactly dilapidated, it had the air of something deliberately left to age, preserved rather than maintained. The main door was secured with a simple latch rather than the electronic locks used elsewhere on the property. Lauren hesitated, then lifted the latch. If anyone questioned her, she was just exploring the grounds, getting to know the facility better. The interior was cool and dim, dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that streamed through gaps in the weathered walls. Unlike the working barns with their neat rows of stalls, this one had been partially converted to storage. Old tack hung on the walls, and crates were stacked along one side, but the space retained its original character. Wide wooden beams soared overhead, and the scent of hay and horses lingered despite what must have been years since animals were kept here. Lauren walked slowly down the center aisle, running her fingers along a worn wooden post. The place had a stillness that felt almost reverent, as if it were a chapel rather than a barn. At the far end, a stall larger than the others had been converted into a kind of sitting area. A faded armchair faced the open doors. Positioned to catch the afternoon light, a small table beside it held an old record player, though no records were visible. On the wall hung a guitar, its strings missing, the wood dark with age. Someone spent a lot of time here, Lauren murmured to herself, trying to imagine who would have created this quiet retreat. Her eyes traveled up, scanning the rafters and then the walls. That's when she saw it, hanging in the shadows between two windows, partially obscured by cobwebs. A picture frame. Lauren stepped closer, squinting in the dim light. It was a photograph, its colors faded with time. She reached up, carefully lifting it from its hook, and used her sleeve to wipe away the worst of the dust. The breath left her body in a rush. The photograph showed a young woman, perhaps 18 or 19, sitting on a fence rail. Her laugh was captured mid-motion, head thrown back slightly, long dark hair catching the light. In her arms, she held a baby, no more than a few months old, bundled in a pale blanket. The woman's expression was one of pure joy as she gazed down at the infant, but it was the baby's face that made Lauren's hands tremble. Those eyes, that small dimple at the corner of the mouth. She had seen them her entire life in her own reflection. "What are you doing here?" The harsh voice made Lauren jump. She turned to find Edward Harper standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright sunlight outside. His expression was thunderous as he strode toward her. I'm sorry, This barn is private." He stopped short when he saw what she was holding, the color draining from his face. "Put that back now." Lauren's heart hammered against her ribs, but something made her hold her ground. "Who is she?" she asked, indicating the woman in the photo. Edward's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. For a moment, she thought he might refuse to answer, or simply order her out. Instead, he seemed to deflate slightly, his shoulders dropping. "That was my sister," he said, his voice suddenly hollow. "Laura. And the baby," Lauren pressed, unable to stop herself. Edward looked at her sharply, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. "A child that was very dear to her," he said carefully. "Both are gone now." He extended his hand, and Lauren reluctantly returned the photograph. Edward gazed at it for a long moment, before hanging it back on the wall, with a gentleness that belied his earlier anger. "This place was hers," he said, looking around the barn as if seeing something beyond the physical structure. "She loved it here," said it was the only place she could hear herself think. Lauren's throat felt tight. The pendant against her skin seemed to burn. "I'm sorry for your loss," she managed. Edward turned to her, and for a fleeting second, that searching look was there again, as if he were trying to reconcile what he saw with something remembered or imagined. "This barn is kept as it was," he said finally. "I would prefer you not come here again." Lauren nodded, but as she turned to leave, she couldn't resist asking one more question. "When did she die?" Edward's reply was so quiet she almost missed it. 27 years ago. 27 years. Lauren was 27. She walked back to her quarters in a daze, her mind racing to connect pieces that couldn't possibly fit together. The timing, the strange resemblance in the photograph, the inexplicable pull she'd felt toward Bennett Hills since arriving. It was madness to think these things were related. Yet as she reached her room and sank onto the bed, her fingers automatically sought the pendant at her throat. For the first time, she looked at it with new eyes, not just as a mysterious keepsake, but as a potential clue, the intricate pattern she'd traced 1,000 times. Could it be a family crest? A personal symbol? Lauren closed her eyes, trying to make sense of the tumult inside her. One thing was certain. Whatever connection existed between herself and this place ran deeper than a random job recommendation. And if Edward Harper knew what that connection was, he wasn't volunteering the information. She would need to find the truth herself. The morning after discovering the photograph, Lauren woke before dawn, her sleep disturbed by dreams she couldn't quite remember. The image of the woman, Laura, and the baby haunted her. Their resemblance to her own reflection was too striking to dismiss, yet too implausible to accept. She dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, hoping to grab coffee before anyone else arrived. To her surprise, Gus was already there, his gnarled hands wrapped around a steaming mug. "You're up early," he commented, nodding toward the coffee pot. Lauren poured herself a cup. "Couldn't sleep?" Gus studied her over the rim of his mug. "Ranch life takes some getting used to." "It's not that," she hesitated, then decided to take a chance. "I found an old barn yesterday with a photograph." The change in Gus was subtle but immediate. A slight stiffening of his shoulders, a wariness that entered his eyes. "Mr. Harper wasn't pleased," she continued. "No, he wouldn't be." Gus set his mug down carefully. "That place is private." He said it belonged to his sister, Laura. Gus's weathered face revealed nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. "The baby in the photo," Lauren pressed. "Mr. Harper wouldn't tell me who it was." "Not my place to say." "Miss Lauren," Gus stood abruptly. "Some stories aren't for sharing. But best leave the past where it belongs." His tone was gentle but firm. "Focus on your work here. You've got a gift with those horses." With that, he left her alone in the kitchen, the sound of his boots fading down the hallway. Throughout the day, Lauren tried to concentrate on her duties, but her mind kept circling back to the photograph. Twice she caught herself touching the pendant at her throat, wondering if it might be connected to Laura Harper. Somehow, during lunch, she overheard two of the younger stable hands discussing a delivery that had arrived from the county records office. "More paperwork for the old man," one said. "Coleman took it straight to his study. What's he looking for in those dusty files anyway?" the other asked. "Dunno. Been requesting them for years, from what I hear." Birth certificates, death records, old police reports. Real cheerful stuff. Lauren's pulse quickened. What if those records contained information about Laura, about the baby? After finishing her afternoon training session, she headed to the administrative building where Richard Coleman kept his office. She found him at his desk, meticulously organizing files. "Ms. Matthews," he greeted her with professional courtesy. "How can I help you?" "I was hoping to look at some of the ranch records," she said, trying to sound casual. "I'm interested in the bloodlines of the horses I'm working with." Coleman nodded. "The breeding registry is in the file room down the hall. You're welcome to consult it." The file room was impeccably organized. With labeled cabinets stretching from floor to ceiling, Lauren scanned the labels quickly. Breeding records, purchases, sales, veterinary records, staff, but nothing personal about the Harper family. As she was about to leave, disappointed, her eye caught a cabinet labeled Historical, pre-1990. Something made her open it. Inside were folders documenting the ranch's early days. Old photographs of the property, newspaper clippings about notable wins at races and shows. One folder was simply labeled Family. Lauren glanced over her shoulder, then carefully slid it out. The folder contained formal family portraits spanning decades. She recognized Edward in some of the later ones, a younger, less somber version of himself. And there, in a photo from what appeared to be the late 1980s, was Laura, the same woman from the barn photograph, though younger here, perhaps 15 or 16, standing beside her brother with their parents. Lauren's hands trembled as she turned to the next photo, but before she could examine it, a voice from the doorway made her jump. "Finding everything you need." She turned to find Coleman watching her, his expression unreadable. "Just getting a sense of the ranch's history," she said, trying to sound casual as she slid the folder back into place. "Mr. Harper is very proud of Bennett Hills's legacy," Coleman replied, his eyes flicking to the folder she'd just replaced. "Though some aspects of the family's history are sensitive." The warning in his tone was unmistakable. "Of course," Lauren said. "I didn't mean to pry." That evening, she drove into Willow Creek. She needed to speak with Miss Mabel, face to face, not over the phone where evasions came too easily. The old farmhouse looked smaller somehow after her time at Bennett Hills, but no less like home. Miss Mabel was in the kitchen, rolling out pie crust, her face lighting up when Lauren walked in. "There's my girl," she exclaimed, wiping flour from her hands to embrace Lauren. "I wasn't expecting you till Sunday. I needed to ask you something," Lauren said, accepting the hug, but pulling back to look her grandmother in the eye. "Something important?" Miss Mabel's smile faltered. "What is it?" "Child, the job at Bennett Hills." Lauren sat at the kitchen table, gesturing for Miss Mabel to join her. "You told me it came through an old church acquaintance, but I don't think that's true." The older woman busied herself with her pie, avoiding Lauren's gaze. "What makes you say that?" "Because I found a photograph at the ranch. A woman named Laura Harper, with a baby." Lauren paused, watching her grandmother carefully. "A baby that looks exactly like me." Miss Mabel's hand stilled. For several long moments, the only sound in the kitchen was the ticking of the old wall clock. "You've always been too clever for your own good," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Graham, who am I?" Lauren asked, her throat tight with emotion. "Was Laura Harper my mother?" Miss Mabel sank slowly into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 78 years. "Lauren, honey, some questions don't have simple answers." "Try me," Lauren insisted, fighting to keep her voice steady. "All I've ever wanted was to protect you," Miss Mabel said. "To give you a safe, happy life." "Protected from what? From who?" Miss Mabel shook her head. "It's not my place to tell that story." "Then whose place is it?" Lauren demanded, frustration rising. "Edward Harper's. He barely acknowledges the photo exists. The ranch staff clam up every time Laura's name is mentioned. Who's going to tell me the truth if not you?" "The truth isn't always a kindness, child." Lauren drew a deep breath, trying a different approach. "The pendant, did it belong to her? To Laura?" Something flickered across Miss Mabel's face, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. "Where did you get the idea that—" "Please don't lie to me," Lauren interrupted, her voice breaking. "Not anymore." Miss Mabel reached across the table to take her hand. "Lauren," Listen to me. There are things about the Harpers, about that place, that you don't understand. Then help me understand. I can't. Miss Mabel's eyes filled with tears. I made promises. To who? But the old woman just shook her head again. Come home, Lauren. Leave that place. Whatever you think you might find there, it won't bring you peace. Lauren stood, a cold determination settling over her. I deserve to know who I am. You know who you are, Miss Mabel insisted. You're Lauren Matthews. You're my granddaughter. That's the truth that matters. But as Lauren drove back to Bennett Hills that night, the farmhouse growing smaller in her rearview mirror, she knew she was only half convinced. The photograph in the barn, Edward's strange interest in her, Miss Mabel's evasions, they all pointed to a story still untold. She thought of what Gus had said, best leave the past where it belongs. But the past wasn't staying buried. It was emerging in fragments, in whispers, in the searching looks Edward gave her when he thought she wasn't aware. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find Gus, of all the people at Bennett Hills. He seemed to know the most about its history, and appeared the most conflicted about keeping its secrets. As Lauren turned onto the long gravel drive that led to the ranch, the moon broke through the clouds, casting silver light across the fields and illuminating the distant silhouette of the old barn, Laura's sanctuary. Standing like a sentinel from another time, whatever truth lay hidden at Bennett Hills, Lauren was determined to uncover it, even if what she found changed everything she thought she knew about herself. The next morning dawned gray and misty. Unusual for the season, Lauren rose early, determined to find Gus before the day's work began in earnest. She located him in the feed room, methodically preparing grain mixtures for the morning feeding. At the sound of her footsteps, he glanced up, his expression changing subtly when he saw who it was. "Morning, Miss Lauren," he said, returning to his work. "I went to see Miss Mabel yesterday," she said without preamble. Gus's hands stilled for just a moment before resuming their task. "How is she? Keeping secrets?" Lauren moved closer, lowering her voice though they were alone. "About me, about the Harpers," the old man sighed, leaning against the workbench. "What exactly are you asking me, Miss Lauren?" "I need to know about Laura Harper. And about the baby in that photograph." Gus studied her face with the same searching look he'd given her that first day. Finally, he gestured toward a bale of hay in the corner. "Sit," he said. Lauren complied, her heart racing. Gus checked the doorway, then joined her, his weathered hands resting on his knees. "Laura was the light of this place," he began, his voice softening with memory. "Younger than Edward by 8 years, spirited girl. Loved music, loved the horses. That old barn was her special place. Their daddy set it aside for her when she was 13. Said she needed somewhere that was just hers." "What happened to her?" Lauren prompted, when he fell silent. "Trouble," Gus said simply. "The kind that changes a young woman's life. She was 18 when she left Bennett Hills. Gone nearly a year. She was pregnant," Lauren said. It wasn't a question. Gus nodded slowly. "The family kept it quiet. Sent her away to have the baby. Old Mr. Harper, Edward's father. He was a proud man, concerned with appearances, and the baby's father. Who was he? A married man, powerful family in the county, someone whose reputation couldn't withstand the scandal." Gus's face darkened. "Not my place to name names, Miss Lauren." "And then what happened?" Laura came back changed. Quiet, sad. She spent most of her time in that barn, playing her guitar, writing in her journal. "Journal." Lauren leaned forward. "Is it still here?" Gus shook his head. "Don't know. If it is, it'd be in that barn somewhere." A bell rang in the distance, signaling the start of the workday. Gus stood, brushing off his pants. "That's all I can tell you now, Miss Lauren. We've both got work to do." "Gus, please." Lauren caught his arm. "The baby. What happened to it?" The old man's eyes grew distant. "Laura loved that child. That's all you need to know for now." As he walked away, Lauren called after him. "One more thing. Did Laura have a pendant? A silver locket with engravings?" Gus turned back, his expression unreadable. "Where'd you hear about that?" Lauren's hand went instinctively to her throat, but the pendant was hidden beneath her shirt. "Just something I've been wondering." "Laura had a pendant," he confirmed slowly. "Family heirloom. never took it off. With that, he left, leaving Lauren with more questions than answers. Throughout the morning, Lauren worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Laura had been pregnant. She'd had the baby. And then what? Where was that child now? The timing aligned too perfectly with Lauren's own age to be coincidence. During her lunch break, Lauren made a decision. She would return to the barn, Edward's warning be damned, and search for Laura's journal. She waited until most of the staff were occupied with the afternoon feed, then slipped away toward the old structure. The barn looked different in daylight, less mysterious, but somehow more melancholy. Lauren entered cautiously, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. Where would a young woman hide a journal? Lauren scanned the converted stall with the armchair, looking for hiding places. She checked beneath the seat cushion, behind the record player, along the wallboards. Nothing. Then her eyes fell on the guitar hanging on the wall. Gus had mentioned Laura playing it. On a hunch, Lauren carefully lifted it from its hooks. The instrument was lighter than she expected, and something shifted inside when she moved it. Turning it over, Lauren discovered a small compartment carved into the back, cleverly disguised within the wood grain. Inside was a thin, leather-bound book, her hands trembling. Lauren replaced the guitar and retreated to the armchair with her find. The journal's pages were yellowed with age, the handwriting inside flowing and feminine. She opened to a random page from the middle. April 15, 1997, back at Bennett Hills after 9 months of exile. Father barely speaks to me. Mother cries when she thinks I'm not looking. Only Edward treats me the same, though I see the worry in his eyes. He's trying to protect me. As always, baby girl is thriving. So beautiful. She has my eyes but her father's chin. I've named her Lauren, crowned with laurel. A victor's name. My little champion who survived despite everyone wishing she didn't exist. He came by today, said we need to be reasonable, that his position in the community makes any acknowledgement impossible. Offered money again, as if that could replace what he's taken from us. Edward nearly hit him. I've never seen my brother so angry. I won't take the money. I won't give her up. She's mine. The only pure thing in this whole sordid mess. Lauren's breath caught in her throat. Her name, her birth year. It was all there in black and white. She flipped ahead several pages, hands shaking. May 20th, 1997. He's threatening to take her away. Says he has the resources, the connections to make it happen legally, that no judge would side with a troubled young woman over him. I can't lose her. I won't, Edward says. We should run. Start over somewhere new. He's always been my protector, but I can't let him sacrifice his future for my mistakes. Tomorrow night, when everyone's asleep, I've packed what we need. The old service road by the east pasture is rarely used. We'll be gone before anyone notices. The next entry was in different handwriting. Masculine, tight with emotion. May 22, 1997. Laura is gone. The accident on the east road. The rain. The curve she's driven 100 times. They found her car at the bottom of the ravine. Her body, but not Lauren. No trace of the baby. The official report says Laura was alone in the car. He made sure of that. No record of a child, no search. But I know. She would never have left without Lauren. I will find her. I swear it. Edward Lauren closed the journal, her vision blurring with tears. Laura Harper was her mother. She had died trying to escape with her baby, with Lauren. But if Edward had been searching for her all these years, how had she ended up with Miss Mabel? And why hadn't Miss Mabel ever told her the truth? The sound of the barn door opening startled her. Lauren quickly slid the journal into her jacket pocket and stood. Edward Harper stood in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. His expression was unreadable as he stepped into the barn. I asked you not to come here again, he said, his voice controlled but with an undercurrent of emotion. I needed to understand, Lauren replied, standing her ground. Understand what, exactly? Why you brought me here? Why you've been watching me since I arrived? She took a deep breath. Why I look exactly like the baby in that photograph. Edward grew very still. What did you find? The journal felt heavy in Lauren's pocket. Something told her not to reveal it yet. Not until she knew more. Enough to know Laura Harper was my mother, she said instead. And that you've been looking for me for a very long time. Edward moved toward the armchair, running his hand over its worn fabric. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, weighted with memory. "You have her eyes," he said. "I noticed it the moment I saw your application photo, but I couldn't be sure, after all these years. So many false leads. Why didn't you just ask me, tell me?" "And say what?" His voice hardened again. "That I suspected you were my missing niece based on a resemblance and timing, that your entire life might be built on lies." He shook his head. "I needed to be certain." "And are you certain?" Edward looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time since she'd arrived. More with each passing day. The revelation hung between them. Too enormous to fully comprehend. Lauren's entire identity, her history, everything she thought she knew about herself, had shifted beneath her feet like sand. "There's more to this story," she said finally. "About the accident. About how I ended up with Miss Mabel." "Yes," Edward agreed, his expression darkening. "Much more, and not all of it safe to uncover." Before Lauren could question him further, the sound of approaching voices broke the moment. Edward straightened, his face resuming its usual reserved mask. "We can't talk here," he said quietly. "Tonight, after dinner, meet me in my study." He left without waiting for her response. Passing two stable hands who were walking by the barn, Lauren remained behind, her hand closing around the journal in her pocket. Whatever Edward planned to tell her tonight, she now had Laura's own words to guide her toward the truth, her mother's words. The afternoon crawled by, each minute stretching as Lauren went through the motions of her work. She'd read and reread the journal entries during stolen moments, each word cementing the impossible reality. She was Laura Harper's daughter, Edward Harper's niece. By evening, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Lauren picked at her dinner in the staff dining room. Unable to focus on the conversations around her, the journal remained hidden in her room, tucked beneath her mattress, but its contents echoed in her mind. "Looks like we're in for a big one," remarked one of the grooms, nodding toward the windows where lightning flickered in the distance. "Hope the power holds," another replied. "Last big storm knocked us out for 2 days." Lauren barely registered their words. At precisely 8 o'clock, she slipped away, making her way through the gathering darkness toward the main house. Fat raindrops had begun to fall, drumming against her jacket as she hurried up the path. Coleman met her at the door, his face revealing nothing as he led her through the quiet house to Edward's study. The room was exactly what she'd expected. Leather-bound books lining dark wood shelves, a massive desk dominating one wall, the smell of cigars and old paper in the air. Edward stood by the window, watching the storm gather strength. He turned when she entered, gesturing for Coleman to leave them. "Would you like a drink?" he asked, moving to a crystal decanter on a side table. Lauren shook her head. "I want answers." Edward poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid and took a seat in one of the leather armchairs, indicating that she should take the other. Outside, thunder rumbled. "Closer now. I don't know where to begin," he admitted. "The beginning would help," Lauren said. "Was Laura Harper my mother?" Edward studied her face for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, beyond any doubt. Despite having already accepted this truth, hearing it confirmed sent a jolt through Lauren. "And my father," Edward's expression darkened. "A man named James Whitley, county prosecutor at the time, from one of the oldest families in the area, married with political ambitions beyond our little corner of Tennessee." "He was married," Lauren repeated. Was I? "An affair," Edward supplied. Laura was young, idealistic. She worked as a volunteer at Legal Aid that summer. Whitley took an interest in her. By the time she realized she was pregnant, he had made it clear there would be no acknowledgement, no support, unless she terminated the pregnancy, which she refused to do. Edward nodded. "Our father was furious, not at Whitley, but at Laura for ruining her prospects. He sent her to a cousin in Virginia until you were born, then expected her to give you up for adoption and return to her life as if nothing had happened." Outside, the storm had arrived in full force. Rain lashed against the windows, and lightning illuminated the study in brief, harsh flashes. The power flickered once, twice, then stabilized. "But she came back with me," Lauren said. "She loved you from the moment she knew you existed," Edward said softly. Defied our father. Defied Whitley. She would have defied the world for you. The accident, Lauren prompted. The journal mentioned a planned escape. Edward's head snapped up. Journal. Lauren hesitated, then decided honesty was her only path forward. She reached into her pocket and produced the small leather book. I found it in the guitar. Edward's hand trembled slightly as he took it. I searched for this for years, he murmured, opening it to a random page before closing it again, as if the memories were too painful to confront directly. A tremendous crack of thunder shook the house, and the lights went out completely. They sat in darkness for a moment before Edward moved to light an oil lamp on his desk. How fitting, he said, his face transformed by the flickering light. It was a night like this, May 21st, 1997, the worst storm of the decade. Lauren leaned forward. Tell me what happened. Edward returned to his seat, the lamp casting long shadows across his face. Laura had planned every detail. She'd saved some money, packed essentials. I helped her. Arranged for a car that couldn't be traced to us, a place to stay until she could get further away. His voice grew distant with memory. The plan was to leave at midnight, taking the old service road that runs along the eastern property line. It's rarely used, especially at night. But something went wrong, Lauren said. Edward nodded grimly. Someone must have overheard our plans or seen her preparations. Whitley was waiting for her on that road. Lauren's blood ran cold. What did he do? I don't know exactly, Edward admitted. I wasn't there. I was supposed to meet her at the rendezvous point 2 miles south. His voice broke slightly. I waited for hours in that storm. When she didn't come, I drove back along the route she would have taken. Another flash of lightning illuminated the study, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The guardrail was broken, Edward continued, his eyes fixed on some point in the past. I could see skid marks on the road leading to the edge when I looked over. He paused, swallowing hard. The car was at the bottom of the ravine, crushed almost beyond recognition. And my mother, Lauren whispered, still in the driver's seat, but you... Edward looked directly at her. You weren't there. No car seat, no baby, nothing. What did you do? I searched the entire area, calling your name, looking for any sign. I thought... His voice faltered. I thought maybe you'd been thrown from the car, or that Laura had managed to get you out somehow before the crash. But you found nothing. Edward shook his head. When the police arrived, I told them about you, that Laura had been traveling with her infant daughter, but the official report never mentioned a baby. Whitley made sure of that. He was county prosecutor, remember, had the sheriff in his pocket. So officially, I was never even there. Whitley wanted no record of your existence. No questions about why Laura was fleeing with a baby in the middle of the night. The accident was ruled driver error due to hazardous conditions. Edward's hand clenched around his glass. And I had no proof to the contrary. Lauren tried to process what she was hearing. But how did I end up with Miss Mabel? She's miles from where the accident happened. That, said Edward, is what I've spent 27 years trying to determine. The storm outside had reached its peak, rain hammering against the windows with almost violent force. I searched for years, Edward continued, hired investigators, followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. I never stopped believing you were alive somewhere. How did you find me after all this time? 6 months ago, I was at a charity function in Nashville. A young server came by with champagne. She looked so much like Laura, it stopped me in my tracks. She said her name was Abigail, but something made me ask where she was from. Willow Creek, Lauren guessed. Edward nodded. When she mentioned being raised by her grandmother there, I began making discreet inquiries that led me to Miss Mabel, and to you. Why not just come to me directly? Tell me who you were, who I was. After so many disappointments, I needed to be sure, and I needed to understand how you'd ended up with Miss Mabel, what she knew about that night. Edward leaned forward. But when I saw you, I knew. You're Laura's daughter. You're my niece. The weight of this revelation settled over Lauren like a physical thing. All her life, she'd felt something missing, a gap in her understanding of herself. Now the gap was filled, but the completion brought its own turmoil. James Whitley, she said slowly. Is he still alive? Still in the area? A shadow crossed Edward's face. He's more than in the area. He's the mayor of Clifton County. Considering a run for state office, from what I hear. Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. And he doesn't know I'm alive, that I'm here. I don't believe so. Not yet. Edward's expression was grave. But if he discovers who you are, what you represent to his carefully constructed life and reputation, the implication hung in the air between them, as ominous as the storm that raged outside. I need to talk to Miss Mabel, Lauren said finally. She must know something about that night, about how I survived. Edward nodded slowly. Yes, but be careful, Lauren. If what I suspect is true, if Whitley was involved in the crash itself, then stirring up the past could be dangerous. For all of us. As if to punctuate his warning, a bolt of lightning struck somewhere very close, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. The windows rattled in their frames, and for a moment, Lauren could almost imagine herself back in that storm 27 years ago. A baby, somehow surviving the night that took her mother's life. I'm not afraid, she said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. I need to know the truth. All of it. Edward studied her, pride and concern mingling in his gaze. You have her spirit, he said softly. Laura would be proud of the woman you've become. The storm continued to rage as they sat in the lamplight, united by blood and separated by decades of secrets. Uncle and niece, finally face to face with a truth only half revealed. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Bennett Hills washed clean, the air charged with that peculiar clarity that follows heavy rain. Lauren rose early, her sleep broken and uneasy. The revelations of the previous night had transformed her world, everything familiar now seen through a different lens. She'd borrowed one of the ranch trucks, telling the stable manager she needed to check on Miss Mabel after the storm. It wasn't entirely a lie. The old farmhouse had weathered many storms over the decades. But Lauren's concern today had nothing to do with structural damage. The drive to Willow Creek seemed shorter than usual, the landscape rushing past as her mind churned with questions. When she pulled into the gravel driveway, she found Miss Mabel in the yard, hanging laundry on the line, an old habit she maintained despite owning a perfectly functional dryer. Lauren, the old woman's face lit up, then quickly darkened with concern. What's wrong, child? You look like you haven't slept. We need to talk, Lauren said simply, helping her grandmother gather the remaining damp clothes from the basket. Inside, the kitchen smelled of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls, Miss Mabel's traditional post-storm comfort food. Lauren accepted a mug, but waved away the offered pastry, her stomach too knotted for food. I know, she said, jumping straight to the heart of the matter. About Laura Harper, about who I really am. Miss Mabel's hand froze in midair, the coffee pot tilting dangerously before she set it down with a small clatter. She lowered herself slowly into a chair, her face suddenly gray. How? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I found a photograph at Bennett Hills. Laura with a baby. With me. Then her journal. Lauren paused, watching the old woman's face. Edward Harper confirmed it last night. Laura was my mother. Miss Mabel closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer or resignation. I always knew this day would come, she said. Just hoped it wouldn't be for a long while yet. Why didn't you tell me? Lauren asked, the question that had burned in her since her discovery. All those years, all those times I asked about my parents. To protect you, Miss Mabel interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. To keep you safe and give you a normal life. That's why. Safe from what? From who? James Whitley. At the name, Miss Mabel flinched visibly. So you know about him too. I know he was county prosecutor, that he's now the mayor, that he was married when he got Laura pregnant. Lauren leaned forward. What I don't know is how I ended up with you, Edward said. Laura died in a car crash during a storm like last night's, that I wasn't found in the wreckage. Miss Mabel's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee mug. For a long moment, she seemed to be deciding something. I was coming back from my sister's that night, she began finally, her voice distant with memory. She'd been sick, cancer, and I'd been helping care for her in Nashville. I was driving the old service road. It was a shortcut back then, before they put the highway in. Lauren held her breath, afraid to interrupt. The storm was terrible, worst I'd seen in years. I nearly missed the turnoff myself. Miss Mabel's eyes grew unfocused. seeing something far away and long ago. I came around that sharp bend by Dawson's Creek and saw the broken guardrail. Something made me stop. You found the crash, Lauren whispered. Miss Mabel nodded. I could see headlights down in that ravine, all twisted and dim. I knew nobody could have survived that wreck. But I had to check. Had my flashlight in the glove box. Made my way down that slope, slipping and sliding in the mud. She paused, taking a sip of coffee with shaking hands. The car was crushed like an accordion. Driver's side took the worst of it. There was a young woman. I didn't know who she was then, just that she was beyond help. But then, Miss Mabel's voice broke. Then I heard a cry, faint, but unmistakable. Me, Lauren said softly. You were in a car seat that had been partially ejected from the vehicle when it rolled, somehow protected by the way it landed in some bushes, wet and cold and crying. But alive. Miss Mabel's eyes filled with tears. A miracle, plain and simple. What did you do? I got you out, wrapped you in my coat, climbed back up to my car and put you in the passenger seat with the heater running while I tried to figure out what to do. Why didn't you call the police? Lauren asked, though she already suspected the answer. I was going to, I swear it. Had one of those early cell phones for emergencies. But then another car came, driving slow, like they were searching for something. I pulled back from the road. Instinct, I guess. Then I saw who it was. Whitley, Lauren guessed. Miss Mabel nodded grimly. He got out, looked over the edge at the wreck, made a call on his car phone. I heard him say, "It's done. The problem is taken care of. No grief, no panic, just satisfaction." Lauren felt sick. He knew about the crash. He may have caused it. That's what I thought too. And there I was with you. The problem he thought was taken care of. What would he do if he knew you'd survived? Miss Mabel's eyes were hard now. I'd worked as a housekeeper for some of these county families. I knew what kind of man James Whitley was. Ambitious, ruthless, the kind who didn't let obstacles stand in his way. So you took me, Lauren said, understanding dawning. I drove straight back to Nashville that night, stayed with my sister another week, told her you were the grandchild of an old friend who needed temporary care. Miss Mabel's voice steadied. By the time I came back to Willow Creek, I had a story ready, that you were my late daughter's child, sent to me after she and her husband died in an accident out west. And no one questioned it. People generally don't question a grieving grandmother suddenly raising her orphaned grandchild. Miss Mabel reached across the table, taking Lauren's hand. I never meant to deceive you, child, at first. I was just trying to keep you safe then. As years passed, you became my family, Lauren finished. Yes, my only family. Miss Mabel's eyes filled again. I loved you from the moment I pulled you from that wreckage. Never once regretted bringing you home. Lauren sat back, overwhelmed by what she'd learned. All these years, she'd imagined dramatic scenarios about her origins. Never this strange truth of chance and quick decisions on a stormy night. Did you know, she asked, when the job offer came from Bennett Hills, did you know it was the Harpers? Miss Mabel nodded reluctantly. The name was on the letterhead. I was terrified. Thought somehow they'd discovered you. Wanted to take you away. But you let me go. You're a grown woman. I couldn't stop you. And part of me thought, maybe it was time for the truth to come out. Maybe, she hesitated, maybe you'd be safer with the Harpers behind you than on your own. If Whitley ever discovered who you were, does he know about me? That I survived? I don't think so. There was never any search for a missing baby. No mentions in the papers. Just a tragic accident that took a young woman's life. Miss Mabel's face darkened. Whitley's been mayor for 6 years now. They say he's eyeing the governor's mansion next. A man like that, with that much power and ambition, he wouldn't want old scandals resurfacing. Lauren touched the pendant at her throat. This was hers, wasn't it, Laura's? Miss Mabel nodded. It was around your neck when I found you. I couldn't bear to take it away. Seemed like the only thing you had left of her. It's a Harper family heirloom, according to Gus. Then it's rightfully yours, Miss Mabel said simply. Just like Bennett Hills, I expect. Lauren hadn't considered that angle, the inheritance implications of her true identity. It seemed trivial compared to the human reality of finding and losing family in the same moment. What happens now? Miss Mabel asked, fear creeping into her voice. Will you stay at Bennett Hills with With your uncle? The word sounded strange applied to Edward Harper, the stern, reserved man she'd known only as her employer until yesterday. I don't know, Lauren admitted. There's still so much I need to understand about that night. She hesitated. About whether Whitley really was responsible for my mother's death. Lauren, Miss Mabel said sharply, be careful, whatever you're thinking. That man is dangerous. He has money, power, connections. And I have the truth, Lauren countered, and Edward Harper. The truth alone won't protect you. And Edward Harper couldn't even protect his own sister. The words hung in the air, harsh but undeniable. Lauren thought of the journal, of Edward's tortured expression as he recounted waiting for a sister who never arrived. I need to go back, she said finally, to Bennett Hills, Edward and I. We need to decide what to do with what we know. Miss Mabel stood, coming around the table to embrace her. Whatever happens, wherever you go, you will always be my girl. Nothing changes that. Lauren returned the hug, inhaling the familiar scent of lavender and baking that had meant home and safety for as long as she could remember. Whatever came next, whatever she decided to do with the truth she now possessed, this bond remained real and precious. I know, she whispered. I love you, Graham. They stood together in the sunlit kitchen, the past and present merging in the strength of their embrace. One family forged by chance and choice, while another, bound by blood, waited to be reclaimed. The drive back to Bennett Hills gave Lauren time to process everything Miss Mabel had told her. The random chance of it all was staggering. If Miss Mabel hadn't taken that shortcut, if she hadn't stopped to check the wreckage, if the car seat hadn't landed just so, her life would have been entirely different, or perhaps non-existent, as she turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to the ranch. Lauren's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Bennett Hills was no longer just her workplace. It was her birthright, her heritage. The realization felt both empowering and unsettling. Edward was waiting on the front porch of the main house, as if he'd been watching for her return. His face, normally so controlled, showed clear relief when she stepped from the truck. I was worried, he said simply. After everything you learned last night, I went to see Miss Mabel, Lauren explained, following him inside. I needed to hear her side of the story, in Edward's study, now bathed in morning sunlight rather than lamplight. Lauren recounted everything. Miss Mabel discovering the crash, hearing Whitley's cold assessment, her split-second decision to take the baby to safety. Edward listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each detail. So she saved you, he said when she finished, and likely from more than just exposure in that storm. You think Whitley would have... Lauren couldn't complete the thought. I don't know, Edward admitted, but a man capable of leaving the scene of an accident where the mother of his child has died. He shook his head. I've always suspected he was directly involved in the crash itself. Do you have proof? Nothing that would stand up in court. Certainly nothing that would touch a man of his position now. Lauren paced the study, unable to sit still with the energy coursing through her. So what do we do? Just let him get away with it. Let him become governor while my mother lies forgotten. Edward's expression was conflicted. For 27 years, my sole focus was finding you. Now that I know you're alive and well, I find myself unsure of the next step. But we know the truth now. Doesn't that count for something? Truth without evidence is just an accusation, Lauren, especially against someone with Whitley's resources and connections. Lauren stopped at the window, staring out at the land that should have been her home. So we do nothing. I didn't say that. Edward joined her, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. But we need to proceed carefully. Whitley doesn't know you survived, doesn't know who you really are. That gives us an advantage. For now. What about inheritance? Lauren asked, voicing the question that had lingered since her conversation with Miss Mabel. If I'm Laura's daughter, you're my only living relative, Edward confirmed. And yes, legally, you would have a claim to the Harper estate. But is that what matters to you right now? Lauren turned to face him. No, justice for my mother matters. Understanding exactly what happened that night matters. Edward's eyes, so like her own. She now realized, softened. You truly are Laura's daughter. Their moment of connection was interrupted by a knock at the study door. Coleman entered, his usual composure slightly shaken. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but Mayor Whitley has just arrived. He's asking to speak with you." Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. Edward's expression hardened instantly. Did he say what this is about? The storm damage fund, supposedly. But he specifically mentioned Ms. Matthews as well. Said he'd heard you'd hired local talent and wanted to meet the girl. Edward and Lauren exchanged alarmed glances. "How would he know about me?" Lauren whispered. "Small town," Edward replied grimly. "Or he's been keeping tabs on Bennett Hills all along." He turned to Coleman. "Tell the mayor I'll be with him shortly. Show him to the front parlor. Not my study." After Coleman left, Edward gripped Lauren's shoulders. "He can't know who you are. Not yet. We need to play this carefully. What if he recognizes me? If I look like Laura? It's been nearly 30 years, and he only saw you as an infant." Edward's voice was steady, but Lauren could feel the tension radiating from him. "Just follow my lead. Reveal nothing." Lauren nodded, her heart pounding as they made their way to the front of the house. Each step felt like walking into a confrontation 27 years in the making, one she hadn't known she was preparing for until yesterday. James Whitley stood by the fireplace in the formal parlor, examining a painting on the wall. In his early 60s now, he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to power and deference. His silver hair and tailored suit projected an image of distinguished authority. "Edward," he greeted, turning with a practiced smile. "Appreciate you seeing me without notice. That storm did quite a number on the county roads." "James." Edward's response was cold but civil. "What brings the mayor all the way out to Bennett Hills?" Whitley's eyes shifted to Lauren, and she felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Partly business, partly curiosity," he replied smoothly. "The county's setting up an emergency fund for storm repairs. Bennett Hills is our largest private employer. Thought I'd discuss your potential contribution personally." "How considerate," Edward said dryly. "And the curiosity part." Whitley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Word gets around. Heard you'd hired a local girl for your training program. Unusual for you, isn't it? Bringing in unknown talent." Lauren felt Edward tense beside her, but his voice remained even. "Ms. Matthews has proven quite skilled with our yearlings. Sometimes the best talent is found in unexpected places." Whitley turned his full attention to Lauren, studying her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Matthews, not a name I recognize from around here. My grandmother is Mabel Matthews," Lauren said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We've lived outside Willow Creek all my life." "Mabel Matthews," Whitley repeated, his brow furrowing slightly. "The name does ring a bell, now that you mention it." Lauren's pulse quickened. Had Miss Mabel crossed paths with Whitley in the past? Had he somehow connected her to that night? "Well," Edward interrupted, "as much as we'd like to chat, Ms. Matthews has duties to attend to, and I'm sure you have other stops to make." "James," Whitley didn't move, still studying Lauren's face. "You look familiar, young lady. Have we met before?" "I don't believe so, sir," Lauren replied, carefully neutral. Something passed behind his eyes. A flicker of recognition, suspicion. "You have remarkable eyes, reminds me of someone I used to know." Edward stepped forward slightly, his posture subtly protective. "About that storm fund, James. Perhaps you could have your office send over the details." The dismissal was clear. Whitley smiled thinly and nodded. "Of course, I've taken enough of your time." He reached into his jacket and produced a business card, holding it out to Lauren. "If you ever decide Bennett Hills isn't the right fit, my office is always looking for bright young people. We have an excellent internship program." Lauren took the card reflexively, fighting the urge to recoil from his touch. "Thank you, sir," she managed. Whitley turned to leave but paused at the doorway. "You know, Edward, I drove by the old East Service Road on my way here. That guardrail by Dawson's Creek is damaged again. Brought back memories." The loaded comment hung in the air as he departed with a final enigmatic smile. Lauren waited until she heard the front door close and a car engine start before releasing the breath she'd been holding. "He knows something," she whispered, "the way he looked at me." Edward moved to the window, watching Whitley's car disappear down the driveway. "Perhaps, or he's fishing, sensing something off about our story. What do we do now?" Edward turned to her, his expression resolute. We need to find proof of what really happened that night. Something concrete that even Whitley can't dismiss or cover up after all these years. And if we find it, then we decide together how to proceed." Edward's voice softened. "Lauren, I just found you. I won't risk losing you by rushing into a confrontation we can't win." Lauren nodded, understanding his caution, even as a part of her burned for immediate action. "There's something else we need to discuss," Edward continued. "Your place here, your identity, legally. You're a Harper. Bennett Hills is your heritage as much as mine. I'd like to make that official." The offer, so unexpected, so enormous in its implications, left Lauren momentarily speechless. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Less than 2 weeks ago, I was just Lauren Matthews, Miss Mabel's granddaughter. Now I'm finding out I'm Lauren Harper, heiress to all this." She gestured at their surroundings. "It's overwhelming. You don't have to decide anything immediately," Edward assured her. "But I want you to know that whatever comes next, you're not alone anymore. You have family, you have a home here, if you want it." Family. The word resonated through Lauren, filling spaces she hadn't realized were empty. For all of Miss Mabel's love and care, there had always been a part of her that felt disconnected. Adrift. Now she understood why. "Thank you," she said simply. As Edward left to deal with the aftermath of Whitley's visit, Lauren remained in the parlor, the mayor's business card still clutched in her hand. She studied it, seeing not a professional contact, but a tangible connection to the man who had, directly or indirectly, robbed her of her mother and her heritage. The back of the card was blank, pristine, like the clean public image Whitley had cultivated over decades, while the truth of his actions remained hidden beneath. "Not anymore," Lauren whispered to herself, tucking the card into her pocket. The pendant at her throat seemed to warm against her skin, a reminder of the mother she'd never known, but whose strength, she was beginning to realize, lived on in her. Whatever Edward's caution, whatever the risks, Lauren knew with sudden clarity that she could not rest until the full truth was exposed. Not just for herself, but for Laura. 3 days passed after Whitley's unexpected visit. Lauren divided her time between her regular duties with the horses and quietly assisting Edward in his search for evidence. They combed through old newspaper articles about the accident, county records Edward had collected over the years, and Laura's journal, looking for anything that might substantiate their suspicions about Whitley's involvement. The atmosphere at Bennett Hills had shifted subtly. Coleman now treated Lauren with a deference that made her uncomfortable, while the stable hands watched her with barely concealed curiosity. Word had spread that she was spending significant time with Edward in his study, though the true nature of their connection remained private. On the 4th morning, Lauren woke to the sound of heavy rain against her window. Another storm system was moving through, less severe than the previous one, but persistent enough to cancel the day's training schedule. She dressed quickly and headed to the main house, where she'd arranged to meet Edward to review some newly arrived county records. To her surprise, the study was empty. Coleman informed her that Edward had left for Nashville early that morning, an emergency meeting with the family attorneys. "He asked that you make yourself comfortable." Miss Matthews. He expected to return by evening. Lauren spent the morning poring over the documents Edward had left out for her. Accident reports, weather records from that night, maps of the old service road. Nothing provided the smoking gun they needed, though the official accident report was notably sparse on details, especially about the condition of the vehicle. By afternoon, the rain had intensified again. Lauren stood at the study window, watching sheets of water cascade from the eaves. Something about the rhythmic sound, the gray curtain of rain, stirred a memory she couldn't possibly have, of another storm. Another time, almost without conscious decision, she found herself walking toward the old barn, Laura's sanctuary, despite Edward's initial warning against entering it. They had visited it together twice in recent days, as he shared memories of his sister in the place she had loved most. The rain soaked Lauren as she crossed the yard, but she barely noticed. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open, the familiar scent of aged wood and dust greeting her. She lit the old kerosene lamp that Edward had shown her and moved toward the converted stall at the back. To her shock, someone was already there, a dark figure seated in Laura's chair, head bowed as if in contemplation or prayer. "Edward," she called, lifting the lamp higher. "I thought you were in Nashville." The figure turned, and Lauren's blood ran cold. James Whitley rose from the chair, his silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. "Not Edward, I'm afraid," he said smoothly. "Though I'm not surprised you'd mistake me for him. You two have grown quite close, haven't you?" Lauren fought to keep her voice steady. "Mayor Whitley, this is private property." "Is it?" He smiled thinly. "I've known the Harpers for 40 years. Mrs. Matthews, Edward, and I go way back. I doubt he'd mind my taking shelter from the storm in this historical relic." Lauren remained near the entrance, maintaining distance between them. "What are you doing here?" Whitley ran his hand along the back of the chair, Laura's chair, with disturbing familiarity, revisiting old memories. "This place was special to someone I once knew." "Laura Harper," Lauren said. Unable to stop herself, Whitley's eyes snapped to hers, sharp and calculating. "You've been learning the family history, I see." "Yes, Edward's unfortunate sister." He paused, watching her closely. "Tell me, Mrs. Matthews, what else has Edward shared with you about the past?" "Only that Laura died in an accident. That she was very young. A tragedy," Whitley agreed, his tone suggesting anything but genuine regret. "Reckless driving in a storm, much like tonight's. These country roads can be so treacherous." The casual cruelty of his dismissal made Lauren's hands shake with anger. She set the lamp down to hide the tremor. "Is that why you came here? To reminisce about a woman who died nearly 3 decades ago?" Whitley stepped away from the chair, moving closer to where the photograph hung on the wall. Lauren tensed, irrationally afraid he might touch it, might contaminate this last tangible connection to her mother. "I came to satisfy my curiosity," he said, "about Edward's sudden interest in local talent, about the remarkable young woman who bears such a striking resemblance to someone long dead," his eyes fixed on hers, "about why Miss Mabel Matthews, who found Laura Harper's wrecked car all those years ago, never mentioned the baby." The revelation hit Lauren like a physical blow. "What are you talking about?" "Please," Whitley scoffed. "Let's dispense with the pretense. I recognized you the moment I saw you, Lauren Harper. You have your mother's eyes." The sound of her true name on his lips sent a chill through her. "How long have you known?" "I suspected when I heard Edward had hired Mabel's granddaughter. I became certain when I saw you." Whitley moved closer, and Lauren resisted the urge to step back. "The question is, what do you know? What has Edward told you?" Lauren's mind raced. Whitley knew who she was. But did he know that they suspected his involvement in the crash? That Miss Mabel had seen him at the scene that night? "I know my mother died trying to escape with me," she said carefully. "I know someone powerful wanted to ensure there was no record of my existence." Whitley's expression hardened. "Your mother was young, confused, made poor choices. Her death was a tragic accident, nothing more." "Was it?" Lauren challenged, emboldened by anger. "Is that why you were at the crash site that night? To verify it was an accident?" Something dangerous flashed in Whitley's eyes. "You've been listening to wild theories, Ms. Harper. Not a healthy habit for someone just discovering her place in the world. My mother wrote about you in her journal," Lauren continued, the words spilling out now. "About your threats, your attempts to buy her silence." "A journal?" Whitley looked genuinely surprised, then dismissive. The fantasies of a troubled girl. No one would believe such tales, especially not against a man of my standing. "Maybe not 27 years ago," Lauren conceded. "But now, with DNA testing, with modern forensics that might examine the wreckage differently, with a witness who saw you at the scene." Whitley's face darkened. "Mabel Matthews would be very foolish to make such claims at her age. Memory is so unreliable, particularly after so many years." The threat was unmistakable. Lauren felt a surge of protective fury for Miss Mabel. "What do you want?" she demanded. "Why are you really here?" "To offer you a chance," Whitley said, his tone shifting to something almost conciliatory. "Edward Harper is using you, using your connection to Laura, to settle old scores. He's bitter, obsessed with the past, but you have a future to consider. What kind of chance? A fresh start, away from here. I have connections throughout the state. Could arrange an excellent position for you in Nashville. Perhaps a generous stipend to help you establish yourself." His smile was cold. "All I ask is your discretion regarding these family matters. You're trying to buy my silence, Lauren realized, just like you tried with my mother. I'm offering you an opportunity, Whitley corrected. One your mother unwisely rejected. Don't make her mistake. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn interior more brightly than the lamp. In that stark moment, Lauren saw Whitley clearly. Not just the polished exterior, but the calculating coldness beneath. My mother's only mistake, she said slowly, was trusting the wrong man. Whitley's facade cracked slightly. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Harper. Edward couldn't protect Laura. What makes you think he can protect you? He's not alone this time, came a voice from the barn entrance. They both turned to see Edward standing in the doorway. Rain-drenched and granite-faced behind him was Gus, and behind them both. To Lauren's shock, Miss Mabel, clutching her raincoat tightly around herself. Edward, Whitley greeted smoothly, recovering quickly. What a coincidence. I was just having a fascinating conversation with your employee. Niece, Edward corrected, moving to stand beside Lauren. My sister's daughter. But then, you already know that, don't you, James? A touching family reunion, Whitley remarked, glancing between them. Though I'm curious why you've kept it so secretive, if you're so certain of the connection. Because we know what you did, Edward said, his voice deadly quiet. Not just the affair with Laura, but what happened on that road the night she tried to leave with her baby. Careful, Edward, Whitley warned. Accusations like that could be considered slander. Not with a witness, Edward countered, gesturing to Miss Mabel, who stepped forward, her face set with resolve despite her obvious fear. I saw you that night, she said, her voice stronger than Lauren had expected. At the crash, heard what you said, that the problem was taken care of. I've lived with that knowledge for 27 years. Whitley's confidence wavered visibly before he recovered. The word of an elderly woman about something she thinks she saw decades ago. Against mine, please. It's not just her word, Edward said. It's Laura's journal. It's the suspicious gaps in the official accident report. It's the fact that the steering on Laura's car was tampered with. Information that never made it into the official record but was noted by the first mechanic on scene. Lauren stared at Edward. This was new information. Something he hadn't shared with her. The mechanic is still alive, Edward continued. Still remembers what he found, and how quickly he was removed from the scene when he reported it to the sheriff. For the first time, Whitley looked genuinely concerned. This is absurd. You have no proof of any connection between me and that accident. Perhaps not enough for a criminal conviction, Edward conceded, but more than enough for a very public scandal. How would that affect your gubernatorial ambitions, James? The timing seems particularly unfortunate. The standoff stretched between them, punctuated by thunder and the steady drumming of rain on the barn roof. Lauren felt as though she were witnessing the culmination of a drama decades in the making. A confrontation that should have happened the night her mother died. What do you want? Whitley finally asked, the same question Lauren had posed to him earlier. Edward's response was immediate and firm. Public acknowledgement of Lauren as Laura's daughter and my niece, a full Harper inheritance with no interference, and your permanent withdrawal from public office. Impossible, Whitley scoffed. You're asking for my entire career. A small price, Miss Mabel interjected. For a young woman's life, Lauren felt Edward's hand on her shoulder. Solid, supportive. Your choice, James, he said. But know this. One way or another, Lauren takes her rightful place as a Harper. You can make it easy or difficult, but you cannot stop it. Whitley looked from face to face, calculating his options. Finally, his gaze settled on Lauren. You truly are her daughter, he said, something like reluctant admiration in his voice. She had that same look when she defied me. Without another word, he moved toward the door. As he passed Edward, he paused. This isn't over, he murmured, low enough that only Edward could hear. But Lauren caught the words and the unmistakable threat behind them. Then he was gone, a dark figure disappearing into the rain, leaving behind the lingering sense of a battle postponed rather than concluded. The four of them remained in the barn, surrounded by the relics of Laura's life, united by the truth they had preserved and protected for 27 years. A truth that was finally, fully in the light. 2 weeks after the confrontation in the barn, Bennett Hills was transformed. What had once been a place of secrets and shadows now buzzed with a new energy, as preparations for a special event occupied every member of the staff. Lauren stood at the window of what was now officially her suite in the main house, watching workers set up chairs on the lawn near Laura's barn. The structure itself had undergone a remarkable transformation, cleaned, restored, and repurposed as a memorial to the woman whose life had been cut short, but whose legacy had finally come full circle. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning to find Miss Mabel entering, dressed in a new lavender suit that Lauren had insisted on buying for her. "Well, don't you look handsome?" the older woman remarked, adjusting the collar of Lauren's cream silk blouse. "Your mother would be proud." The casual mention of Laura still sent a thrill through Lauren. The freedom to speak openly about her mother after weeks of whispers and secrets felt like breathing fresh air after a lifetime underground. "Is everyone here?" Lauren asked, checking her appearance one last time in the mirror. The silver pendant, her mother's pendant, gleamed at her throat. "The staff, some of your horses from home, Pastor Williams, though I think he's still confused about the whole situation." Miss Mabel chuckled. "Edward's waiting for you downstairs. Nervous as a cat, if you ask me." Lauren smiled at the image, mild. It's a big day for him, too. After Whitley's departure that stormy night, the truth had unfolded with remarkable speed. Edward had put his formidable resources into motion, formally acknowledging Lauren as his niece and heir. Legal documents were drawn up, DNA tests conducted. Though merely a formality, no one who saw them together could doubt their relation. And preparations made for a public announcement. Whitley had made no further direct contact, though his political machine had quietly begun the process of stepping back for health reasons. Whether he would honor the tacit agreement remained to be seen. But Edward had made it clear, if Whitley attempted to interfere with Lauren's recognition as a Harper, the full story, including Miss Mabel's testimony about the crash, would be released to the media. As Lauren and Miss Mabel descended the grand staircase, Lauren caught sight of Edward pacing in the foyer below. He looked up at their approach, his face lighting with the smile that had become more frequent in recent days. "There you are," he said, coming forward to take both their hands. "Everything's ready." The three of them made their way out to the lawn, where nearly 100 people had gathered. Ranch staff, neighbors, friends of the Harper family, who had been quietly informed of the remarkable discovery of Edward's long-lost niece. At the edge of the crowd, Lauren spotted Gus in his Sunday best, looking proud and emotional. He had become a crucial bridge between her past and present, filling in details about Laura that even Edward hadn't known. Her favorite songs, the names she'd given the horses, the way she'd laugh with her whole body when truly amused. Edward led them to a small platform that had been erected in front of the barn. Behind them, visible through the open doors, was a beautifully restored space featuring photographs of Laura throughout her life. Her guitar returned to pride of place, and in a glass display case, the journal that had helped bring the truth to light. As they took their places, a hush fell over the gathering. Edward stepped forward to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Many of you have known the Harper family for decades. You've seen our triumphs and our tragedies, our moments of pride and our darkest hours." He paused, scanning the faces before him. 27 years ago, we lost my beloved sister Laura in what we believed was a tragic accident. What most of you don't know is that Laura had an infant daughter, a child whose existence was deliberately concealed by those who saw her as an inconvenience, a threat to reputation and ambition. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Edward continued. "On the night Laura died, she was trying to escape with her baby, to build a new life away from the forces that sought to separate them. The crash that took Laura's life seemed to have claimed her child as well. But fate, it seems, had other plans." He turned to Lauren, extending his hand. She stepped forward to join him, her heart pounding. By what can only be described as divine providence, the infant survived the crash. She was found and rescued by a woman of extraordinary courage and compassion, Miss Mabel Matthews, who raised the child as her own, protecting her from those who might have wished her harm. Miss Mabel dabbed at her eyes as several heads turned in her direction, expressions of awe and respect on many faces. "That child grew into the remarkable young woman beside me," Edward continued, his voice swelling with pride. through an extraordinary series of coincidences, or perhaps Laura's guiding hand from beyond, Lauren came to Bennett Hills, to her family home. Unaware of her true heritage, Lauren felt a wave of emotion as Edward's hand tightened on hers. Today, we not only acknowledge Lauren Harper as my niece and rightful heir to the Harper legacy, but we also dedicate this restored barn as a memorial to Laura, a celebration of her life, her music, and the daughter who carries forward her spirit. Applause broke out, accompanied by a few tears among the longer-serving staff who had known Laura. Edward stepped back, nodding to Lauren to indicate it was her turn to speak. She approached the microphone, surveying the faces. Some familiar, many new, all part of the world that should have been hers from birth. 2 months ago, "I thought I knew who I was," she began. "Lauren Matthews, granddaughter of Miss Mabel, a simple farm girl with a knack for horses. Today, I stand before you as Lauren Harper, daughter of Laura, niece of Edward, and still very much the person Miss Mabel raised me to be." She smiled at her grandmother, who beamed back through her tears. "I've learned that family isn't defined solely by blood, but by love, by sacrifice, by the choices we make to protect and nurture one another. I've been blessed with 2 families, the one that gave me life and the one that saved it." Lauren touched the pendant at her throat. "This barn was my mother's sanctuary. I never knew her in life, but standing here, I feel her presence. I hear her in the stories Edward and Gus have shared, see her in the photographs, and recognize parts of her in myself." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Someone once tried to erase me from existence, to deny Laura's choice to be my mother, to deny my rightful place in this family. That effort failed, thanks to the courage of Miss Mabel, the persistence of my uncle, and perhaps my mother's determination that lives on in me." The crowd was silent now, hanging on her words. "Today, we reclaim not just my identity, but Laura's true story. Not a tragic footnote in the Harper family history, but a young woman of courage and conviction whose greatest legacy stands before you now." As she finished speaking, Edward signaled to a worker near the barn, who pulled a cord to unveil a small bronze plaque beside the door. It read simply, "Laura's Place, where truth finds light." The reception afterward was a blend of celebration and reunion. Lauren moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and sharing stories of her unconventional journey. Miss Mabel, initially overwhelmed by the grandeur of the event, soon found herself the center of attention as guests sought to hear her account of that fateful night. As the afternoon waned, Lauren found a moment of solitude near the paddock where several of the yearlings grazed peacefully. Edward joined her, leaning against the fence. "Holding up okay?" he asked. "It's a lot to take in," she admitted. "But yes, it feels right." Edward nodded, his gaze distant. "I spent so many years searching, never knowing if you were alive or dead. Now you're here, and sometimes I still can't quite believe it." "What happens next?" Lauren asked. "With Whitley, do you think he'll honor the agreement?" "For now," Edward replied cautiously. "His political survival instincts are strong, but men like James don't change their nature. We'll need to remain vigilant." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Edward spoke again. "I've been thinking about the future of Bennett Hills. The training program you've started with the yearlings shows real promise. I'd like to expand it. With you at the helm." Lauren smiled, touched by his confidence in her abilities. "I'd like this place. It's starting to feel like home." "It is home," Edward corrected gently. "Your home. It always was." As the sun began to set over the fields, casting long shadows across the land that generations of Harpers had cultivated, guests began to depart. Lauren watched from the porch as Miss Mabel chatted animatedly with Gus near the garden. The old woman would be moving into a guest cottage on the property next week. Close enough for daily visits, but maintaining the independence she valued, the farmhouse in Willow Creek would be kept as a weekend retreat, a link to the life that had shaped Lauren for 27 years. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone, Lauren slipped away to the barn. The interior was softly lit now, the display of Laura's life creating a warm, intimate atmosphere. She moved to the glass case that held the journal, its pages open to the entry where Laura had written about naming her daughter, "My little champion, who survived despite everyone wishing she didn't exist." "Not everyone, Mom," Lauren whispered. "And I'm still surviving." She settled into the armchair, Laura's chair, and for the first time since discovering her true identity, felt completely at peace. The pendant at her throat seemed to warm against her skin, a tangible connection to the mother she'd never known, but whose courage had shaped her destiny. Outside, through the open barn door, the lights of Bennett Hill's manor shone in the gathering darkness, no longer a mystery or a symbol of what she'd lost, but a beacon of home, family, and truth, finally brought to light. In the distance, at the edge of the property, a car paused briefly at the main road before continuing on. Behind the wheel, James Whitley watched the glow of lights from the celebration of truth he'd tried so desperately to prevent. His face was impassive, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel as he drove away from Bennett Hills. Temporarily defeated, but not destroyed, the story of the Harpers and the Whitleys, it seemed, was not yet fully written. But tonight, at least, truth and justice had prevailed in the gentle hills of Tennessee.